great to be back with you once again on the India Development Debate. Let's take this across to our stellar panel that's joining me right here. Narendra Taneja, spokesperson of the BJP, Sanjay Jha represents the Congress Party, and Narayan, money market expert, Maithili Busnurmat, our consulting editor right here. So thanks very much each one of you for being with us. And you know, this is, you cannot escape the politics on this debate in many ways there. And Maithili, if I may start off with you. Actually, let me start off with Sanjay Jha. And Sanjay, I know politics is going to explode tomorrow morning on this. I know the Congress and the BJP will be in the crossfire, but the new series does knock the UPA off the growth pedestal. You know, that's perhaps the biggest headline out of this. That unlike the big boast, it's not as if the highest rate of growth was delivered under the UPA government, both 1 and 2.
You know, Supriya, I was hearing the Niti Ayog vice chairman on your show, and I thought he was making the most disingenuous and specious arguments. If data is not comparable, what use is the data? And can you imagine GDP growth registered over the past decade? Suddenly you have a new methodology which is being developed in cooperation or consultation with Niti Ayog, suddenly goes and deflates the GDP of the past. I mean, there is no economic rationale behind it whatsoever. This is what I would call as fake, fictitious and fabricated GDP data. And I'll tell you why. I'll give you 3 reasons behind it. Point number 1, this government is authoritarian and does not like unpleasant news. You have seen what happened just a week ago. The Ministry of Agriculture put out a report saying how demonetization damaged the farming community and affected farmers who could not buy fertilizers and seeds. The moment there was a massive uproar on that, the 1 week later, the ministry comes out with a report saying entirely something to the contrary and saying it benefited the farming community by quoting unnamed sources. I mean, what do they think the people of India are? They can just take us for a jolly ride? Take the second issue. Where is the employment data? The official employment data is not being released for the last several quarters, and the reason behind that is the unemployment crisis in India is reaching stratospheric levels. The government doesn't want to talk to you about it. So what do they say? We are coming out with a new method and we'll announce it in January just before the elections. So what you're witnessing is a complete manufacturing of statistics and data. I think we are becoming like China, opaque, and the world investor financial community will begin to suspect us just like they did when they changed the GDP data.
Okay.
And one last
Give me a minute. Sanjay,
look at the reality. The United Nations has acknowledged, just one figure, just one figure and I'm done. The United Nations has acknowledged that between 2004 to 15, 271 million people were lifted out of poverty. That means 90% of the time it was a UPA performance. Now, lifting people out of poverty is related to GDP growth. How is it that the GDP growth is being deflated and the 271 million people were lifted out of poverty? I mean, they will have no answers to these questions. It is a lie, it is a fabrication, and it is a shame.
Okay. 1 second, Sanjay Jha. I will go across to Narendra Taneja before I go to Anant and Maithili. And Mr. Taneja, the new back series GDP data says that the average growth rate under UPA was 6.7%. Under the NDA, so far it has been 7.35%. I will come to anecdotal evidence and GFCF and credit on all of that in just a bit. But it is very difficult not to draw political motives, especially given that elections are just 3 to 4 months away. And you know, suddenly we have a revision of the series where the UPA is being put on the back foot because you have been on the back foot so far as economic management is concerned. I mean, in many ways, it's very difficult for any expert, including us journalists, to not look into the politics of economic growth data.
Tell me one thing, Supriya. How does it help, for instance, okay, for a second, if I buy your argument or buy your theory, how does it help us politically? You think the people in villages and towns and even in big cities like Delhi, Bombay, they're going to vote on that basis? How does it help us? The point is that, you know, as Mr. Rajiv Kumar tried to explain, I mean, at great length, the whole idea is that, you know, the data we use and the methods we use are the contemporary ones, are the modern ones. That's it. That's it. But if you come to TV channel like yours, a prestigious channel, and say, look, GDP data fake, we are more like China, are you helping your country? Probably not. I mean, if you have got some scientific, arguments, by all means do that. But to pass judgments that we are the new China in terms of, so don't trust us, or these data are fake. You see, I mean, that's not really done. If you have something, and by the way, for your information, if you don't buy it from me, you can ask your own people who covers, the statistical matters, that the whole process was actually initiated at the time of UPA 2, because they realized that they probably need to change the methods, go for, different kind of more modern, more contemporary, probably, go for a different kind of mapping when it comes to different sectors, including telecom and services and others, as Mr. Rajiv Kumar tried to explain. That's what it is.
Taneja,
It's
Mr.
nothing
Jha.
to do with, absolutely
Okay.
nothing to do with politics. But if you
Okay.
see a political
Mr.
motive, kindly explain to me, how does it help?
Okay.
How does it help us politically? Please explain.
Mr.
Can I respond to that, Supriya?
Mr. Taneja and Mr. Jha, give me a minute. It changes the narrative. No, Sanjay, give me a minute. I will come back to you. It does dent the narrative, so you can't say it doesn't help us politically. But having said that, both of you just give me a minute. I will go across to Maithili and Anant Narayan. And Maithili, to you, I want to delve a little deeper into the 2008 Bobby decoupled and all of that. I will do that in just a bit. But on this data per se, the Niti Ayog Vice Chairman and everybody else in the government we are speaking to are telling us that this is better data. This is more reliable, this has more volumes, this has more value add, it's more sophisticated. Instead of telecom subscribers, we are looking at minutes, we are looking at sales tax data for trade. Do you buy this argument? Is this a data that's going to make us at par with how the world and other countries measure their growth?
Well, Supriya, it's a little unfortunate that what should be a highly technical exercise is acquiring a political hue. But that's how it's been ever since the base was revised in January 2015, when the base was revised to 1112. It's been, there's been a heated debate about how the GDP data, the numbers were bumped up. So it's very unfortunate, as I said, that what should be a highly technical exercise, and the CSO is a very competent professional organization. But unfortunately, I think this has opened a can of worms for two reasons. One is the timing. Given that it's come at a particularly, what quote unquote inopportune moment from the general public view, that is very close to the elections. So it does cast a little bit of doubt on, why has it been raised now? It is likely to raise eyebrows. Secondly, the second reason why everybody is likely to look at it with a little bit of suspicion is that the Mandal report had actually bumped up the data, that as compared to the earlier series, the Mandal report had suggested the numbers needed to be raised up, whereas the new data that has just been released this evening lowers the numbers. So for both these reasons, the numbers released today does open a can of worms, and this is very unfortunate because, as I said, the CSO is a highly competent professional organization, and it is true the methodology that has been adopted in the new series is vastly superior to the earlier series. But at the same time, the methodology is not entirely comparable, given that many of the sources were simply not available in the earlier backcasting numbers. So there are a number of questions that are raised, and unfortunately the timing is such that it doesn't really put everything in a very good light.
I think you hit the nail on its head when you say that, there was a lot of data that wasn't available. Even the MCA data, it wasn't available from the period of 2004 to I think 2006, 7 or 8, and it has been said on record that traditional methods were used then. So you're right in saying that some of this data wasn't available. But Anant, to you, in many ways, will this series, will this new data rewrite India's economic history? Are we rewriting history in terms of how much growth there was? Because it is not as if it's a decimal point difference here and half a percentage point difference there. The difference in each year is so stark that you can't not use the phrase rewriting economic history.
No, absolutely, Supriya. Look, what should have been a simple statistical exercise left to arcane, PhD research scholars. Back series is the most boring statistical exercise ever possible, and splicing is even more so. The fact that it's occupying prime time discussion, frankly, is a sad commentary on the state of affairs. I think a few quick points. One is that GDP data as it is computed today is good, it's superior, and everybody agrees upon it, I think, across political parties. Where there's a question mark, unfortunately, is on the extension of the series to the back data, right, between 2004 to 2011. Now, every statistician is telling us that it's not easy doing this exercise because, as you rightly mentioned, as I mightly mentioned, in 2011-12, we moved to using the MCA21 database, which is an awesome database, much more superior to the ASI and the IIP database we were using earlier. And in the absence of that database in the past, you have to make assumptions. Now, the Mandal Commission made one certain assumption and came out with a number which was higher. And lo and behold, we now have a number which is coming out much lower, coming out from the NITI Ayog and CSO right now. So unfortunately, there's a cloud of suspicion about the data which is prior to 2011 now. What should have been left to policymakers, etc., to purely use for statistics and to figure out on policy making, etc., has now become political. And I frankly blame both political parties for it. I agree with Mr. Taneja. How does it matter what past data was? How is it going to impact a voter in the villages? It's such a silly exercise at a level, trying to fight about what happened 10 years ago on GDP of all things.
Right.
And last things, look, even if you agree on GDP numbers being higher or lower, it doesn't tell you anything about the quality of the growth. For instance, in 2008, 9, 10, 11, we did see higher growth because there was a fiscal priming up.
Anand, exactly.
Now,
Anand, give me a minute.
Was a problem because eventually that led to weaknesses.
Right. Inflation. No, Anand, that's a point that I want to discuss separately, and I will come back to both you and Maithili on the technical aspect of this. But just to go back to Sanjay Jha, and I know, Sanjay, you wanted to come in, so I'll give you a quick 30 seconds to rebut, but also a very direct question. This back series data, which, you may refute it, but the methodology is, people say, a lot more sophisticated and reliable than previous data. Where you cannot be blamed is that you did not have a lot of these indicators at your behest to make the data more sophisticated then. But having said that, this does point us in the direction that India was more impacted by the 2008 crisis, and this whole argument of being decoupled was not true. I mean, growth after all was 7.7% in 2008 and 3.1% in 2009, according to the new data. So, while the average growth in 2006 to 2009, when you were in power, was 9.6% according to the whole series, it is 7.9% now. So it seems the growth years weren't as glorious as they were projected to be.
Supriya, look at one reality. The Congress party-led UPA won an emphatic victory, increasing its number of seats from 145 to 206 in the 2009 elections. It was based on a good, stable economic performance. Of course, there was a great recession, but I think the Indian economy was extremely well managed. So, therefore, all this that you're seeing is a great hoodwinking and manufacturing of new data points to basically confuse the debate. That's exactly what this government does. Please remember, it is in the public domain how this government lobbied, tinkered around with some very elementary issues to improve its ranking on ease of doing business ranking. It is there in the public domain. It is all basically an attempt to try and just improve ranking. This is a government of optics. L.K. Advani called Narendra Modi an event manager. Now let me answer two fundamental data that will tell you why this government is again wrong and why Rajiv Kumar is misleading the people and the analysts of the country. Number one, look at agriculture. During the UPA period, agriculture grew at over 4%. Under Narendra Modi, it's 2.3%. Manufacturing, or rather industry. Industry grew during our time at 8.4%. During their time is 8.1%. Now look at these two and look at the difference already. So what are you talking about? Where is this sudden comparison that the Modi GDP is better than the previous ones? I can give you numbers on private disposable income, which during our time grew at 20% faster than the previous NDA government. You look at the actual rise in real wages, it is higher during the time of the UPA. And end of day, I think this is the point that you need to factor in. 271 million people lifted out of poverty. How?
Sanjay,
how did that happen without GDP?
That's an important. So Sanjay, give me a minute. Give me a minute. I want to go through Maithili on one point. And Maithili, while 270 million people being lifted out of poverty is a very important indicator, and is perhaps an indicator that points us to the direction that growth was meaningful. But it also points us in the direction that if growth was indeed low and if we were indeed hit by the global crisis a lot more than we had earlier envisaged, the whole fiscal stimulus package didn't quite work. It perhaps fueled inflation, which came out to be the UPA's nemesis. It widened the deficit. It was left to Mr. Chidambaram to come back and repair it. And in some sense, this revision of India's economic history is important for us to talk right now because, you know, time and again when there's a sector, when the economy is not doing well, you know, there's this growing clamor of a fiscal package. Look at what the fiscal package did. It's not as if it stoked growth, it actually fueled inflation and widened the deficit.
Well, Supriya, that's not entirely new because it is well known that the fiscal stimulus did lift up growth, but it lifted it up only for a very short period because it was simply not sustainable because it did lead to inflation further down because of the much higher fiscal deficit. As for the talk about, you know, decoupling and how we were hit by the global recession much more than earlier, that's really not correct because if you look at the data again, it shows you that as per the old series, in 2007-8, growth was 9.8. It fell to 3.9. That means a fall of 5.9 percentage points. Whereas as for the new series, it fell from 7.7 to 3.1, a fall of 4.6 percentage points. That means both the old and the new series show quite dramatically that the global recession, the collapse of Lehman Brothers, did hit India very dramatically. But subsequently, the fiscal stimulus given by the government did lift up the growth quite dramatically from 3.9 to 8.5. This continued for a year or two to 10.3, and then subsequently the growth slowed and inflation picked up. So the fact is well known that we are very much part of the global economy, and what happens in the rest of the world does impact us, which is why today we in India are so concerned about what's happening on the trade front. So it's indisputable that we are part of the global economy, and what affects the rest of the world does affect us. So the collapse of Lehman did impact us. The fiscal stimulus package did lift up growth, but obviously could not be sustained because fiscal deficit shot up beyond from 2.5, it went up to over 6%, and that did lead to inflation picking up and growth slowing down. So I think on that there is no dispute at all. The question really is how much was growth impacted, and that is where we are splitting hairs. And as Anand said, GDP numbers really don't win elections. What matters is the quality of the growth.
Exactly. Yes, but you know, on the quality of growth and you know, on the policy action on this, I'm tempted to go across to Mr. Taneja, but I will in just a bit. Anand, if I may come to you on this very point, that while you know there was a trouble with growth as such, while there was a trouble with growth going down in the new series, the reality is that the curve stays very much the same. So would policy action any different had made any big difference either? I mean, you know, could policy action have been very different from what it then was? Because the curve is very much the same. The trajectory is, you know, it mirrors the trajectory obviously at a higher and a lower level.
You know, Supriya, one fallout of all this fracas that we are seeing around this GDP numbers is that doing objective analysis of macros and policy and looking at the interplay between them has become extremely difficult. You risk being labeled one or the other the moment you make any such hypothesis. For instance, I think it's a fair hypothesis what you were mentioning. The fiscal response that we undertook in 2008, 2009, 2010 gave us short-term relief, boosted up the GDP, but did possibly lead to issues as far as inflation, as far as current account deficit, as far as the overall macros collapsing. And once oil prices started to go high, we had a big problem in 2011, 2012, 2013. The same token can also be applied to this government. You know, the fact that GDP rates came down sharply in 2016, 17 and FY18 raises the questions, did demonetization and the implementation of GST have an issue on GDP? Now, these are valid policy questions to be asked and analyzed as objectively as possible. We cannot have such an atmosphere where, you know, everything has become so polarized and partisan that we can't have these rational discussions anymore. So, you know, for God's sake, let's get the politicians out of this, GDP series for a change. As Mr. Taneja said, it doesn't make a difference for politics. Please go and, you know, do your electoral hustling separately. Let the experts get into the GDP woods and figure out what really we can draw for lessons for the future.
Fair point. Give me a minute and I'll come across to Mr. Taneja. But you know what I like about, Anand, in this entire debate and in this entire controversy is at least we are discussing growth. At least we are discussing development. We'll be discussing jobs. We'll be discussing, India's inflation. We are not going to be discussing temple and lynching and things like that. So that is what is encouraging to me. But Mr. Taneja, if I may come to you, sir. The average growth so far under the Modi government is 7.35%. but the GCF has been very low. It has been 27%, despite the fact that this average growth rate is actually higher than UPA2's. Credit offtake has been low as well. In fact, I was chatting with an economist, and a figure that he points out is credit growth was 25% when the economy was growing at 7.7%. At 8.2% economic growth, credit growth is at 5%. That doesn't add up. So these are some of the most important indicators of economic activity: investment and credit offtake. Both of those are not commensurate with higher growth levels.
No, Supriya, I mean, you are entitled to your interpretation, absolutely. But the point here is that, you know, the whole that's precisely what we have been trying to do, so that experts and economists and international economic community, they don't question our statistics. They don't question our GDP data. When it comes to China, people question, you know, China's data left, right, and center. And the result is the country suffers, you know, from the credibility when it comes to, when China claims we are growing at 6%, people say discount 2%. We don't want that to be such kind of situation. The whole idea to go for it, this is not a political decision. These are professionals in NSO and other associated organizations, so that we kind of collect data. The whole method we use, the whole methodology we employ is basically such that, so that there is absolute transparency, there is more credibility, and the entire exercise is more sophisticated, at par. That is the endeavor, that is the effort, at par with the developed economies of the world. But you can still have the question. Now that's why I'm saying it's easy to politicize anything and everything, call it fake or call by any name. And I invite my friend Sanjay Jha from the Congress party, if you want to make, you see, basically, you know, the back series and the new series and election issue, please do that. Let Mr. Rahul Gandhi try that. Let him call a press conference on this and say that, look, we are trying to politicize it because we want to take a political advantage of it. It's not possible. You want to make an attempt, please call a press conference tomorrow morning. We'll be very happy. Do that. Now the question is, here the exercise is different. When you come to our data, yes, you can question. And I personally, as a trained economist, I like that. If you come up with an argument like Supriya, I like your argument. But the point here is that when you look at the total picture, what we want basically, that so you don't have to make these arguments at data. Once they are shared with you, you trust every single part of the data that's served to you in terms of GDP, or for that matter, other statistics. That's the whole exercise, and that is the whole idea, and that's actually the mission.
No, fair point. But Maithili, if I may go ahead, while you know, it's very important to have robust data, it's important to have data that's just 1 second, Sanjay. It's important to have data that's unimpeachable, that should not be impeached, that should not be suspected. There is disparity, however, what we are seeing on the ground. You know, the productivity that this data seems to suggest is not being reflected in the company's performance. You know, I was just looking at one figure, 6.8% growth projected for manufacturing in fiscal year 15 is in stark contrast to the 5% decline in earnings in the 9 months of fiscal year 15 for NSE-listed manufacturing companies. The EPS of companies doesn't commensurate with this. Why is this so? What explains this divergence really?
Well, yes, there are some puzzles in the GDP data, but I think that's partly because macro data is so complex, Supriya. It's very difficult to connect and make it say that 2 plus 2 is always equal to 4. So there will be issues, and I think this is why it is important that we constantly keep upgrading the methodology that we use, ensure that, you know, we coverage the sources, because as I think it was explained both by the former chief statistician T.C. Anand and also today by Praveen Srivastava, the fact is that, you know, we were not really able to cover a large part of our economy. So the unorganized sector, communications, financial services, all these numbers which were earlier overestimated have now been brought down. So there are some puzzles that remain. That is very true. But to the extent that we are constantly trying to improve our methodology, improve our coverage, and also ensure that, you know, there is greater comparability in the data, I would not question the data too much, for the simple reason that yes, the CSO is a very professional, very competent organization, and it's true, as Mr. Taneja said, that nobody really casts doubt on Indian data the way they do on Chinese data. So these are methodologies that are adopted by the UN SNA, the System of National Accounting, and I would tend to go with that and say that maybe yes, we need to ensure that data does become increasingly robust, and if we are not able to match everything and get very precise answers, I would leave it at that and say that we need to constantly upgrade the kind of data that we have. and ensure that after all things like EPS etc. are not really right comparisons, because the stock market is always forward looking, whereas the GDP data is basically backward looking in the sense of we are measuring what went for what happened in the previous year. So I would not worry too much on that.
Fair point. Fair point, fair point. But Sanjay Jha, I will come to you. And you know, while many people will question the timing, while many people will question the methodology that's being implemented, is it showing UP in poorer light and all of that, the reality is that our GDP data is a subject of much suspicion and ridicule. I still remember the former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramanian actually once saying that he doesn't understand, he's puzzled by the GDP growth numbers and consequently all the constituent elements that go into constructing it. So from that point of view, is a one-time reset the right thing for an economy like ours? We want our space under the sun. We want to be the world's fastest growing economy. We can't have an economy that's based on dodgy data.
Yeah. Supriya, let me tell you that this government is not transparent, which is why you have a cry wolf situation. I mean, people worry about the political intentions of this government. I give you the example of poverty alleviation and linking it to GDP. I'll give you another one. GDP and jobs. In a growing economy, jobs go up. I have data, and I've tweeted it out from official sources, which tell you that during the time of the UPA 2004 to 11, that's the period that I have put out on the tweet, it is called as the golden period of manufacturing employment growth in India. Look at the joblessness crisis currently. So you see, it doesn't somewhere down the line have any rational economic fit. You know, there are people who can take positions and, you know, sound sympathetic towards one party or the other. But the fact is, numbers don't lie. And I totally agree with you. Look at it that today there is a hashtag called Delhi Chalo because all the farmers are coming to New Delhi. Why? I mean, will anybody believe that, yes, India has become very services sector dominant, but the role of agriculture, you have the farmers congregating in Delhi tomorrow because there is a pan-India rural distress. I mean, these are manifestations of a serious economic turmoil that the government can't walk away from by just twisting the headline. And we are worried because, let me tell you, no government is forever, no government is forever. And doing a damage control in 2019 would be a gargantuan exercise.
Okay, Sanjay, give me a minute. I will go across to Narendra Taneja. And Mr. Taneja, apart from what we are talking about, the important story also here is that why did the Niti Aayog have to get involved? You know, there is ample proof that Niti Aayog is a body selected by the politicians. Why could not this be left to CSO alone? I mean, CSO has done this for a while, and you know, I think the proof of my argument is, and I'm just seeing tweets that are coming in. Former Finance Minister Chidambaram has tweeted that the earlier numbers were calculated by the National Statistical Commission. Has that been disbanded? Why is the Niti Aayog getting involved with this? And one would question, why is the Niti Aayog involved? And is this a self-goal, their involvement?
I think it's a... No. The point is that the entire job is done by professionals, CSO and other professional organizations. They are the people, they are the folks who know the job and they have done the job. But your question why, Niti Aayog is even talking about it, why they are at the forefront and all that, personally speaking, Supriya, I agree with you. I go along with you. I think Niti Aayog ideally should have been not in the picture at all. That should have been left to the organization. People who have done the job, they should have been the face and they should have been the interface. I agree with you on that because, but still, as I said, that, when it comes to the real work is done by professionals, it's a fantastic work. The whole idea is basically to eventually build a kind of mechanism and a kind of methodology so that the entire world treat India and data and the such figures that will come out of India at par with the, such things coming out of developed economies, the more advanced economy. That's the whole idea.
Right.
But on Niti Aayog, I go along with you, Supriya.
Fair point. Okay, that's the good thing about talking to people who are hardcore professionals. They concede ground where they believe that, the argument being made is right, and I appreciate that honesty. But two quick last questions, and I'll request both Maithili and Anant to make them brief. And Maithili, to you then. Actually, Anant, to you then first. What does all of this data, the new series and all of that, what will this mean for policy making in the future? How is this going to impact policy making, and what will this also mean to growth levels of the future? We have this very you know, misplaced euphoria of sorts. We want to be the world's fastest growing economy. Every time we touch 7.1%, there is a hurrah. Does all of that need to be recalibrated as well?
Look, Supriya, as Maithili was saying, there's a lot of questions which need to be answered. We've got a fantastic CSO, by the way, and NSC, a whole bunch of statisticians who can be trusted. We've got to let them do their job and give the inputs to policymakers, including in NITI Ayog and in RBI and elsewhere, for them to draw the right conclusions. Now, what we don't want is this becoming politicized. And I frankly blame both political parties for it. When the NSC came out with that one particular estimate in August, immediately you had the opposition parties jump up and say and draw conclusions from it. And we had the ruling party going into a shell and acting all, you know, cat and mouse, keeping the data away, being very quiet about it, and then now coming out and along with NITI Ayog, as Mr. Taneja accepts, coming out and making this, you know, alternative numbers. It just brings the whole thing into a whole, you know, cloud, which we can do without. We've got enough trouble as it is trying to make sense out of the numbers which come out of our CSO and NSS, etc. So, you know, let those guys do their job. They're experts. They are very good. We are not China, as Mr. Taneja said. Let them do their job. And one way of letting them do their job is for everybody else to just stay away and let them do their job.
Fair point. Okay, very quickly, Maithili, let's have the last word on the show, and this has to go back to the politics. The Prime Minister campaigned in 2014, hard-selling an economic dream of development. Somewhere along the way, the agenda was hijacked by, you know, more communal overtones. Some issues which were important took a backseat. We are now talking about the Ram Mandir, religion, and all of that to the fore. Am I going to be too ambitious to say that this perhaps could be that last-ditch attempt to create noise, news around economic growth, and in some sense this could serve us all well?
I wish it were true, Supriya. It would be wonderful if India actually focused, if our elections were won like what Bill Clinton said, it's the economy stupid. Unfortunately, in India, it's still politics, religion, ethnicity, language, lynchings, whatever you may call it. So that is a sad part of it. I really do wish we could get it back on growth and meaningful growth. Growth with, properly distributed growth with jobs, because you can have jobless growth, and that's what we've largely had. So I do wish if this would really help to bring the focus back to development and growth, that would be wonderful. But if only that were true, I think in most cases, wishes were horses, beggars would ride them.
Oh yes, and this is a pipe dream of mine, that the elections will be fought on economic firms. But thank you very, very much, Narendra Taneja, Sanjay Jha, Anant Narayan, of course, Maithili Bhusnurmat, for being with us in this edition of the India Development Debate. It's important to put the highlight on growth. I like a growth debate. It's important to discuss growth. It's important to discuss what flows out of growth. Equitable, just growth is important for this country. It's important to also have data that we can build that foundation on. Any dodgy data is suspicious, is going to be questioned, but the politics behind it is unmissable this time around. Thank you very much for being with us in this edition. We take a quick breather. Up next with Top 10 at 10.